In this next video, we're going to go ahead and do the abdominal dissection. In the previous video I just did, we removed the skin from this female rat. And so what we now want to do, and I did make a little bit of mistake, I made a little cut in there when I was cutting with the scissors. But it's fine, I don't think I went very deep. So this is, these are muscles, of course, here, right, that were underlying the skin. So we're going to do this dissection. The best thing is probably to start, you can start at either end really, but I'm going to start down here and lift up the tissue a little bit, the muscle. And what I want to do is just cut through the muscle without cutting any of the underlying structures. So again, you want to keep the tips of your scissors more or less horizontal, or even sort of pointed up just a little bit, so you don't end up cutting into the organs below. So this, of course, is the abdominal cavity that I'm opening. Above this is the diaphragm, right about the level of the scissors here, and then you have the thoracic cavity up there. Alright, so I've made a cut down the middle, and what I'm going to now do is cut to the side. Again, being a little bit careful with the scissors, so I don't cut into the delicate organs underneath, because we want to take a look at those organs. So you can see there's a bit of a flap here, so I'm going to do another cut across down here at the bottom. And you can now start to see the internal organs within the abdomen of this female rat. So we'll do some more cuts here. We'll do another cut here at the bottom. And I'll cut across here, just below the thoracic cavity again. So there would be, in a second I can show you where the diaphragm is. The diaphragm is skeletal muscle that marks the border between the thoracic and abdominal cavities. So once you get the abdomen open up like this, you may decide that the preservative smell is a little overpowering. So at this point you could take your rat and wash it off a little bit at the sink. And okay, so that, because that, you know, the preservative smell is pretty overpowering. So let's take a look at what we've got now. So we can now look in here, and we can start to see some interesting structures. We're gonna, let me get rid of this for a second here. Move connective tissue there. We can look in here and we can see a very flat muscle. Okay, let me point at it. This flat muscle is the diaphragm. That's skeletal muscle that you control. The control center for the skeletal muscle is essentially in the lower part of the brainstem, in an area called the medulla oblongata. And it generates a rhythm for breathing that continues, starts in the womb and actually continues till the very end of your life. And so this is skeletal muscle. It's under regular voluntary control. Okay, so that's the diaphragm, and we can look at that more in more detail later. Now this next thing that we see here is the liver. So you can see there's multiple lobes to the liver. It's pretty dark colored. There's more connective tissue here. So the next thing we can see right under the liver is the stomach. So the stomach lies right below, sort of tucked underneath the liver there. And it's sort of bean shaped, if you can see this. Okay, so if we remove the liver, we'd be able to see the esophagus, and we'll do that later. But the esophagus goes to the stomach, and you have the sphincter here between the esophagus and the stomach, and that's the cardiac sphincter. Now, if you go to is continuous with the small intestine, so you have another sphincter there. That's the pyloric sphincter. Now, you may notice a kind of yellowish, loose material here. That's the pancreas. So it's found right here in the, sometimes referred to as the greater curvature of the stomach, this bottom curvature. The lesser curvature is towards the top of the stomach, which you can't really see very well here because of the liver, but it's also curved. Again, the stomach is kind of bean-shaped. Okay, so this is the pancreas. The pancreas is an organ that's an exocrine organ. It releases digestive enzymes through pancreatic ducts into the small intestine. So it helps with digestion. It's also an endocrine gland. It releases hormones such as insulin, which helps to regulate blood glucose levels. Now, tucked just under the stomach is a kind of a crescent-shaped organ, and that's the spleen. So that's right here. It's a little bit darker in color than the liver, but it looks similar to the liver. It's kind of banana-shaped. So its function is destruction of red blood cells and blood storage. Okay, so let's go on. So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at the small intestine. So the small intestine, again, we go from the stomach to the small intestine. Actually, let me remove the liver. That'll make it easier to see what's going on here. So we're going to take your scissors and remove the liver. Carefully remove the liver. It has multiple lobes. So we're going to pull it out. Okay, so all this is liver, so you can see it's pretty extensive. Okay, the diaphragm even better. Okay, that's this very fat muscle here, skeletal muscle. Well, what you want to look for at this point is look for the esophagus. Here's the esophagus. And it goes, so the esophagus is smooth muscle. It's quite muscular. It brings food from the mouth. You go from the mouth to the pharynx to the esophagus. So it's bringing food by peristalsis to the stomach, which is kind of a bean-shaped structure. The food then continues into the small intestine. Okay, so we see all that pretty well here. Okay, so this is the small intestine, and again, this yellow stuff is the pancreas. And we've got the spleen, which is this curved structure. Which lies right behind the stomach, just posterior to the stomach and a little inferior to the stomach. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is take out the small intestine. So what you'll see with the small intestine, there's a lot of mesentery. So it's a kind of conductive tissue, and it's highly vascularized. You'll see a lot of blood vessels and things like that in here. And so you can use your probe to disrupt that mesentery. And our goal here right now is to sort of get the small intestine out. If you can keep whoops, I just broke it. I was just going to say, if you can keep everything intact, that's great. I was a little impatient there and I broke it. So be more gentle, and you should be able to get it all out intact in one big piece. So the small intestine is small in diameter, but it's very long in length, as you can see here. And so it does the absorption of food, hence the very large surface area due to its long length. Where did I break it? So the small intestine leads to the cecum, which you can see here. That's this big pouch-like structure. So some people mistake that for the stomach. It's not the stomach, it's the cecum. So humans do not have a cecum. we have an appendix instead. So the cecum, again, it's a pouch that connects the small intestine to the large intestine, which is just below the cecum. The cecum has helpful bacteria that help to digest cellulose found in plant cells. So something like a rat, you can assume, would be eating more, perhaps very fibrous or plant materials than a human would, and therefore they have to have this cecum, much more larger than, and we don't really have a cecum, we have an appendix instead. Okay, so then if we continued further along, we get to the, trying to follow this. See, I broke this earlier. So if we look at the small intestine, I did break it by accident, but it has three sections. There's the duodenum, that's the first part. There's then the ileum, and we're not going to make a distinction here between all the three sections, but there's the ileum, and then there's the jejunum. That's the very bottom part. The jejunum is just before the cecum. The cecum then leads into the large intestine. So let's look at the large intestine for a second, actually, before I pull it out. So you can see that it actually does a bit of a curve. So we curve upwards and back around down. So that's actually kind of interesting in some sense, because when you have a stomach ache, you may identify the ache as coming from near your stomach, but it actually may be in your small intestine. It could be even in the large intestine, since it does a sort of arc. And so sometimes it's actually the large intestine where you have the stomach ache, and yet you feel it coming from the stomach area, but that's because it sort of does this big loop upwards before coming downwards. Okay, so the large intestine is specialized for absorbing water, hence the material, which was more watery, now turns into feces essentially. At the end, you have essentially the large intestine, first of all, is also called the colon, so that's another word for this. Small intestine, it leads to a part called the rectum, right, which is right before the anus, and so that's where you would store feces just before it's expelled from the body. And I believe that that's all that we're really doing in our class for the abdomen. Oh, I want to talk a little bit more about the abdomen here. So again, I'm taking out some more liver. So you'll notice towards the very back of the abdominal cavity, and it has it's behind another sheath here, which is kind of shiny. It shows up as being shiny. It looks like a kidney bean, and that is in fact one of the kidneys. And often you can see the adrenal gland right on top. So it may not show up very well on the camera here, but there's a small gland sort of riding right on top of the kidney, and that's the adrenal gland. And you should note that there's kind of there's connective tissue on top of this. And of course you have two kidneys, so if we look on the other side, we'll find the kidney on the other side. Again, here's the adrenal gland. It's a little bit lighter in color. It's almost a yellowish color. Not sure how well that's showing up on the video. It's right there near the end of my probe. Yep. And another thing about the kidneys, of course, is they receive a tremendous amount of blood flow. So this particular rat was injected so that the arteries are red. And if we remove some of this connective tissue, which we'll do later, you would be able to see red arteries going into the kidney. Now the kidneys also have ureters, which I think we'll look at next in another video, because this video is running a little long. So we'll do that in the next video.